Exactly at 4 o'clock in the morning on July 2025, South Korean Navy sailors patrolling the waters near the North Korean border were shocked when they saw something floating in the sea, which they initially thought was just a pile of trash. But their eyes widened when it suddenly raised its hand, and that's when they realized it was actually a man, weak, shivering from the cold, and almost out of strength after floating for hours in the freezing sea, with no certainty of where the current would take him. The events that followed were considered one of the most daring escapes from North Korea, using nothing but sheer courage and trash. How did he do it? This is his incredible true story. Mr. Good Vibes. Yeah. The young boy, Min Min Woo, was born and raised in South Hwanghae Province, a small coastal community in the western part of North Korea. At first glance, he was no different from the millions of other citizens in the country, where every day revolves around a single goal: to find enough food to get the family through to the next day. But behind the peaceful view of the sea lies one of the strictest systems controlling the lives of everyone in the entire country. Min grew up in a place where the sea was not only a source of livelihood, but also a natural boundary of freedom. On the other side of the water is Gyeodong Island of South Korea. But for him and all his fellow countrymen, it seemed like a world they could never reach. Their community is surrounded by watchtowers with armed guards, fences with barbed wire, brutal soldiers ready to shoot, and shores with buried landmines. Even approaching certain parts of the coast the wrong way could immediately result in arrest or death. On clear nights, the sparkling lights of South Korea can be seen from their shore. However, since childhood, they were repeatedly taught that that country is a place of chaos and suffering. And they have absolutely no chance of finding out if that's true, because listening to foreign radio, watching foreign shows, or even simply asking what life is really like outside North Korea is strictly forbidden. The wrong word to the wrong person can bring great harm, not only to the one who spoke but also to their entire family. Getting food was also difficult in their province. The rations distributed by the government were often insufficient, so many families were forced to look for anything they could eat along the coast. Even as a child, Min was already used to wading into the cold and muddy waters, swamps to catch crabs, gather shellfish, and pick seaweed, despite the danger of landmines scattered along the coast. While other children around the world play after class, he studies how to read the movement of the water, when it is safe to wade in, and when a person could be swept away by the strong current. At school, they don't just study reading, writing, and mathematics. Almost every day, they are taught about the history of the Kim family and the importance of complete loyalty to the government. There are also times when students are brought to witness public executions of people accused of serious crimes or betrayal of the state. At a young age, Min Woo learned that fear is a part of everyday life. When Min reached the right age, he knew that there was only one path waiting for him: compulsory military service. In North Korea, almost all men are required to serve in the military for many years. But for him, it was not an honor but a future he feared. The military is known for its strict discipline, lack of food, forced labor, and harsh punishments even for the smallest mistakes. Many former soldiers have also shared stories of severe hunger that drives some to steal food just to survive as the day approaches. As the day of his service approached, he increasingly felt that if he accepted that fate, he might lose any chance of ever leaving the country. There, his perspective began to change. The things he learned since childhood, reading the flow of the sea, recognizing every part of the shoreline, and understanding the movement of nature, were no longer just skills for survival. He gradually saw these as possible paths toward freedom. And at that moment, he secretly decided that he would pursue the nearly impossible dream of millions of North Koreans to escape. He knew that if he failed, not only could he die, but the government could also punish the loved ones he left behind. For Min, staying seemed even scarier than risking his own life to escape. Because of this, he knew that courage alone was not enough for him to escape from North Korea. He needed immense patience, perfect timing, and a plan that would leave not even the slightest trace in a country full of informants and strict state surveillance. A single wrong move would be enough for him to be arrested before he could even reach the coast. So for several weeks, he secretly started collecting discarded trash, pieces of styrofoam, and other lightweight plastics that were washed up or thrown away near the shore. For most people, these things had no value, but for Min Woo, they were his only hope for escape. They could keep him afloat and make him look like floating trash for many hours. He couldn't pick them up all at once because the neighbors or patrolling soldiers might notice him, so he collected them one by one and carefully hid them in a place where no one could see. When he had gathered enough materials, he used old pieces of cloth and rope to tie them together tightly, but in a way that wouldn't hinder his swimming. He didn't have any chance to test if it would work, nor was there any place to practice. He would only be able to use it once, and if he made a mistake in tying it, or if it gave way in the middle of the sea, there would surely be no one left to save him. Choosing the day of his escape wasn't something he could take lightly, especially as someone who grew up by the shore. He was already familiar with the changing tides. He knew there were times when strong waves could push him away from South Korea and bring him back to the shores of North Korea, or he could be swept toward the open ocean where survival is almost impossible. So every day he observed the movement of the water, the direction of the wind, and the times of high and low tide. He waited for a night with the smallest chance of failure. Finally, the night he had been waiting for arrived on July 30, 2025. While the shore was covered in darkness and a thin fog, he quietly left behind everything he was used to in his life. He didn't bring any food, extra clothes, or anything that could weigh him down. He could only afford to make one wrong decision, because literally every step Min Woo took felt like a gamble between life and death. Before he could even reach the water, he had to cross the muddy shore where any wrong step could hit a hidden landmine and blow him up in an instant. As he slowly moved forward in almost complete darkness, he tried to hold back each breath, because even the slightest sound could reach the guard towers watching over the entire shoreline. With every second, he felt that the searchlight could turn and shine directly on his body. A single shout from the guard, one wrong move, or even a shadow noticed in the mud would be enough for gunshots to ring out and for everything to end before he could even reach the sea. As he got closer to the water, each meter felt heavier than the last. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of his chest, but he couldn't stop. That night there was no middle ground. He would either make it to freedom or disappear as if he never existed. And when he finally felt the cold water of the Yellow Sea reach his chest, he realized there was no way back. In front of him was the vast ocean, darkness, and death. But for the first time in his life, every crashing wave seemed to bring with it the hope of finally achieving the freedom he had long dreamed of. As Min Woo submerged into the cold water of the Yellow Sea, he immediately put on and tightened against his chest the improvised flotation device he had made from pieces of styrofoam and trash that he had secretly collected for weeks. But he had no way of knowing whether they would be enough to keep him afloat for many hours. He had never tested them before. He had no chance to practice or make mistakes. That night, his entire plan depended on a few pieces of trash that could sink at any moment. As he was slowly being swept away from the shore, the most dangerous part of his escape began. He couldn't swim continuously because he knew he would quickly get tired and drown. Instead, he let the current carry him while gently moving his arms and legs just enough to stay on course. That night, the sea was his only hope for freedom, but it could also become his grave. Even scarier than the big waves were the soldiers guarding the shore, with strict orders for the guards to immediately shoot at anything suspicious moving in the water, especially in areas known to be escape routes. So for many hours, Min Woo could barely lift his head. He forced himself to look like just a piece of drifting trash as he quietly let the waves carry him. A single wrong move, a strong splash of water, or even the slightest shadow noticed from the guard tower could end his life. With just one gunshot, as he moved farther from the shore, the current grew even stronger. The sea that separates North and South Korea is known for its fast and unpredictable tidal currents. If he went off course, he could be swept away from South Korea and end up in the open ocean, where it would be almost impossible to find him. Even worse, the current could also carry him back to the shores of North Korea, where capture, severe torture, or death surely awaited him. His body also gradually began to stiffen from being soaked in the cold water for so long. As each hour passed, his movements became slower and slower. He could barely move his fingers, and each breath felt heavier than the last. He knew that if he completely stopped moving, his body temperature would quickly drop, and he might lose consciousness before reaching the other shore. So even though he barely had any strength left, he forced himself to move his hands and feet. Just enough to stay alive, but not enough to make any noise that might attract attention. 1 hour, then 2, then 3, until nearly 10 hours had passed, and all he could see was the sea and darkness. He had no idea how far he had gone or if he was still heading in the right direction. The only thing he knew was that he could no longer go back. With every passing minute, his chances of survival grew smaller. But at the same time, his hope of escaping the country that had once been his prison grew bigger. As the sky slowly began to brighten, he noticed something unusual in the distance. It was no longer the dark shore of North Korea. For the first time, after almost 10 hours of battling the sea, he could finally see land, but he still wasn't safe. The final part of his journey could still be the most dangerous of all. After a long struggle in the cold sea, he finally reached the area close to South Korean territory. But instead of feeling relieved, he became even more anxious, knowing that even though he had passed North Korea, it didn't mean he was safe yet. South Korean soldiers also strictly guard their border because of the ongoing tension between the two countries. Any unknown person coming from the sea could be mistaken for an armed spy or a member of a secret North Korean operation. In such a situation, soldiers may use force before they even know the person's true intentions. Exactly at 4 o'clock in the morning on July 31, Min was almost out of strength, his arms and legs were weak, and he could barely stay afloat. However, when he noticed a South Korean Navy ship patrolling the area, he gathered the last of his strength, raised both his hands, and waved them repeatedly as a clear signal that he was unarmed and only wanted to surrender. The soldiers noticed something unusual floating in the water as their vessel approached. They gradually realized it was actually a man who could barely move due to extreme exhaustion and cold. They immediately carried out a rescue operation and carefully pulled him out of the sea. For the first time after that very long night, he once again felt the hard floor beneath his body. He was shaking uncontrollably, could barely speak, and was extremely weak and pale due to being soaked in cold water for a long time. However, he succeeded in something that only a few have accomplished. He managed to cross from North Korea to South Korea through sheer determination, but his ordeal did not end there. Instead of starting a new life right away, he still had to undergo a series of difficult examinations before he could finally be recognized as a true refugee and not a sent spy. Although Min Woo survived one of the most dangerous escapes in the world, he was not immediately considered a free man. Instead of being brought to Seoul, South Korea, he was first taken to a secure South Korean intelligence facility. For several weeks, officials examined every detail of his story one by one. He was asked about his hometown, the roads, schools, local officials, and even the way people spoke in their area. South Korea needed to make sure that he was not a spy deliberately sent by North Korea to enter their country. After he passed the thorough verification, only then was he sent to Hanawon, a special facility where North Korean defectors are taught how to live in a modern society. It was here that he first learned how to use an ATM, a smartphone, and other technologies that are common in South Korea but almost non-existent in North Korea. For many defectors, even the simple act of choosing from dozens of types of instant noodles at the supermarket can be a confusing experience because they grew up with almost no choices. The name Min Woo used in this story is not his real name. Until now, the authorities in South Korea have not released it in order to protect his identity, and most importantly, to protect the family he left behind in North Korea. Although his story is true because his escape was published in many international newspapers and news outlets, it was the South Korean officials themselves who confirmed what really happened. Under the strict system of the regime, the escape of a family member can lead to intense investigation, loss of employment, forced relocation, and in some recorded cases, severe punishment for relatives proven to have helped or known about the escape plan. That's why Min-woo chose not to reveal his identity. There are also many defectors like him who remain unnamed but secretly send money to their families left inside North Korea after finding work in South Korea using underground brokers who operate through China. Because there is no legal way to send money to North Korea, they are forced to rely on dangerous networks that charge huge commissions in exchange for delivering money to their loved ones. Min-woo's story is not just the story of a man who drifted at sea for 10 hours and pretended to be trashed to achieve freedom. It's also the story of a person willing to risk his own life because he believes there's a world better than the one he grew up in. So everyone, while we are free to express our thoughts, choose the jobs we want and what we eat, and make decisions for our own future, I hope we don't take this for granted because in other parts of the world, there are people willing to risk their lives just to experience the freedoms that we often take for granted. Could you risk drifting at sea if you were living in North Korea right now? Don't hesitate to share your opinions in the comment section below. If you like this video, share it with others and don't forget to subscribe. Also watch the videos on the right to waste even more of your time.